She once served in silence, pulling her team out of places that never officially existed. But when she came home, they didn't call her a hero. They arrested a female SEAL sniper in court. Rebecca Stone didn't fall in combat. She fell under accusations, whispers, and erased records. They said the female SEAL sniper had lied about her missions. They said she caused deaths. They said the truth was simple. No one defended her. No one believed her. Until the doors opened and an admiral walked in, forcing the entire courtroom to confront what happens when we judge a female SEAL sniper before we understand the cost of her silence. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. The courtroom sat deep inside Norfolk Naval Station, all polished oak and cold authority. The kind of room where careers don't just end, they disappear. At the defense table sat Commander Rebecca Stone, hands folded, back straight, eyes forward. She wore her dress blues like armor, though the faint red marks on her wrists told another story she'd been cuffed only moments earlier. Rebecca wasn't loud. She wasn't pleading. She didn't look scared, and somehow, that made it worse. They called her the imposter, a woman who dared to claim she'd been a SEAL sniper, who said she'd led missions no one could find on paper. The press whispered, officers avoided her eyes. Even allies kept their distance, as if truth itself were contagious. Beside her sat Lieutenant Commander Henry Walsh, her defense attorney, sweating under the weight of silence she refused to break. "Give me something," he whispered. She didn't move, not because she couldn't speak, but because she wouldn't. Across the aisle, the prosecution sharpened its knives, decorations questioned, missions erased, lives lost, blame squarely on her shoulders. And through it all, Rebecca Stone stared straight ahead, carrying a secret heavier than chains. Some missions are so real, they can never be proven. There's a moment in every courtroom when the air changes. You can't hear it, but you can feel it, like the fire dying low and leaving only embers. That moment came on the third day. Rebecca Stone looked thinner by then, not weaker, just worn. The collar of her uniform sat a little looser against her neck. Dark shadows lived beneath her eyes, the kind that came from nights spent staring at a steel ceiling, listening to keys jingle down a corridor. Still, her posture never faltered. If they were going to break her, they'd have to do it without seeing her bend. The prosecution called their star witness just after lunch, Captain Marcus Holloway, her former commanding officer. He walked to the stand with the confidence of a man who had never doubted he would be believed. Salt and pepper hair, rows of ribbons, the kind of officer people described as by the book, which usually meant something else entirely. "Captain Holloway," the prosecutor began smoothly, "did Commander Rebecca Stone ever serve under your command in a special operations capacity?" Holloway didn't hesitate. No, she was an intelligence analyst, talented on paper, but prone to overstepping her authority. Rebecca didn't react, but Henry Walsh felt it like a punch he couldn't block. And the operation in North Africa, the prosecutor pressed. Holloway's jaw tightened. She disobeyed direct orders, abandoned her post. Her actions resulted in unnecessary casualties. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Rebecca's hands clenched beneath the table, knuckles whitening, though her face remained carved from stone. In her mind, memories surged dust storms swallowing the horizon, gunfire tearing through radio static, the scream of rotors cutting through heat-soaked air. She forced them back down. This wasn't the place. This wasn't the time. Henry stood to cross-examine. "Captain Holloway," he said carefully, "what was the objective of that operation? Classified? The location? Classified? The identities of the personnel allegedly endangered by my client." Holloway didn't blink. "Classified." Henry exhaled slowly. "Your Honor, everything that could exonerate my client appears to be conveniently classified." The judge's expression didn't change. "Proceed with questions you can ask, Counselor." Henry returned to his seat, jaw tight. Rebecca didn't look at him, but she spoke quietly. "They don't exist anymore." He froze. "What? The records?" she whispered. "They were erased." Henry stared at her. That's not possible. Not without... You're not asking the right question, she interrupted, eyes burning for the first time. Ask who benefits if I'm destroyed. Before he could respond, the court reconvened. The next witness hurt more than the first. A naval psychiatrist, clinical, detached, merciless. He spoke of psychological evaluations, of identity fabrication, of hero fantasies born from marginalization. He suggested Rebecca Stone had created an elaborate fiction to compensate for being a woman in a world that never truly accepted her. She wanted to belong, he said, adjusting his glasses. And when she couldn't, she invented a version of herself that did. Someone laughed in the gallery. Rebecca's breathing slowed. In, out, in, out. She had crawled through hell for people who would never know her name, and now she was being told she'd imagined it all. Then came the witness no one expected. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross. Broad-shouldered, confident, the look of a man who wanted the room to see him as a warrior. Commander Stone was never part of the mission she claims, Cross said firmly. I led that extraction. She wasn't there. The prosecutor smiled. The case felt finished. But something shifted. Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Cross, not his face, but his uniform. She saw it instantly. A trident pin mounted just a fraction too high. Ribbons that didn't belong together, awards from operations that occurred in different theaters at the same time. Small things. Deadly things. She slid a folded note across the table to Henry. He read it once, then again, and slowly, his spine straightened. When he stood to cross-examine, his voice was calm, too calm. Chief Cross, he said, you testified that you served with SEAL Team 5 during Operation Iron Dagger. When did that take place? March of last year, Pacific Theater. And your commanding officer. Cross hesitated. Commander Lawson? Henry nodded. Interesting, because Commander Lawson didn't assume command until July. And Operation Iron Dagger was a joint Marine operation, not SEAL. A flicker crossed Cross's face. Just a flicker? I may be confusing code names, he said quickly. Or, Henry replied softly, you may be confusing reality. Objection, the prosecutor snapped. Sustained, the judge said. Move on. But it was too late. Eyes shifted in the gallery, pens paused. Somewhere in the back row, a man in dress blues quietly stood and slipped out, phone already pressed to his ear. Rebecca Stone leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the trial began, she smiled. That night, no one slept. Not Rebecca Stone, not in the narrow bunk of the holding room where the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old metal, and not Henry Walsh, who sat awake in his apartment, papers spread across the floor like fallen leaves, replaying every word of the day in his head. Something had shifted. Everyone felt it. By morning, the courtroom no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a fault line, quiet on the surface, pressure building underneath. The media presence had doubled overnight. National outlets now crowded the back rows. Cameras hummed softly. Whispers carried sharper edges. Whatever doubt Henry had planted with Chief Cross's testimony, it had taken root. Rebecca entered under guard, but she walked differently now. Not triumphant, not relieved, just alert, like someone who knew the storm was close enough to smell. The prosecutor stood with forced confidence, but his hands betrayed him, papers rearranged too often, jaw clenched too tightly. Chief Cross sat in the gallery instead of the witness box this time, eyes forward, spine rigid. He didn't look at Rebecca. The judge called the room to order. Commander Stone, the prosecutor said, turning to face her as if delivering the final blow. To be clear, at no point did you participate in the operation for which you claim to have received commendation. Rebecca didn't respond. She wasn't required to. That was when the doors opened. Not abruptly, deliberately. The sound echoed through the room, heavy wood against brass hinges cutting straight through the prosecutor's words. Conversations died mid-breath. Every head turned. 2 uniformed naval security officers entered first, scanning the room with the quiet efficiency of people trained to expect danger. They moved aside. and the space between them felt intentional. Then she stepped through. Admiral Eleanor Graves, 4 stars, Chief of Naval Operations, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy. Her presence didn't need announcement. It didn't need permission. It settled over the courtroom like gravity itself. The gold on her shoulders caught the light as she walked forward, heels striking the floor in measured cadence. The judge stood instinctively, color draining from his face. "Admiral, this is highly irregular." She didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Rebecca Stone. Rebecca rose without being told. Muscle memory took over back straight, chin level, eyes forward. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Admiral Graves raised her hand. A perfect salute. The room froze. Rebecca returned it instantly, precision unmarred by weeks in custody, by humiliation, by silence, 2 warriors acknowledging one another without a word. When the Admiral finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried, "Commander Rebecca Stone," she said. "The President of the United States sends his regards. He regrets that the details of your assignment could not be declassified sooner." The courtroom erupted. Journalists shot to their feet, pens scratched furiously. Phones appeared, where none had been moments before. The prosecutor staggered back as if struck. The Admiral turned at last to the bench. "Captain," she said evenly, "these proceedings are hereby suspended." The judge stammered, "Admiral, this court." She handed a sealed folder to the bailiff, an executive order, effective immediately. The bailiff passed it forward. The judge's hands trembled as he opened it. "This tribunal," Admiral Graves continued, "was convened on falsified evidence as part of a deliberate effort to discredit a decorated officer whose service remains classified at the highest levels." She turned her gaze sharp as a blade toward the prosecution table. "Commander Hayes," she said, "your security clearance is revoked pending investigation. Naval security will escort you out." 2 MPs stepped forward without hesitation. The prosecutor's face collapsed. This is an outrage." "It is accountability," the Admiral replied coolly. Chief Cross shifted in his seat, instinctively reaching to adjust his trident pin. He stopped mid-motion when he realized what he was doing. Too late. Admiral Graves addressed the room again. The Operation Commander Stone led resulted in the rescue of 17 hostages from an enemy black site, among them 2 American children whose names you will never know. Rebecca remained at attention, eyes fixed forward, but something in her posture softened. Not pride, release. Her commendations were earned, the Admiral said. Her silence was required, and her loyalty, unquestionable. Henry Walsh sat frozen, understanding at last the weight of the choice Rebecca had made to endure disgrace rather than break an oath. The Admiral turned back to her. "You are needed elsewhere, Commander," she said quietly. "Transportation is waiting." Rebecca nodded once. As she stepped forward, the courtroom dissolved into chaos. Questions shouted, officers whispering urgently, careers unraveling in real time. At the doorway, Admiral Graves paused. "Let this be remembered," she said, her voice carrying over the din, "that some of the most important service this nation receives is never meant to be seen." Then she walked out. Rebecca Stone followed. And behind them, the room they left behind would never be the same. The car didn't say much as it pulled away from the courthouse. Neither did Rebecca Stone. The world outside the tinted windows blurred past rows of uniforms, flashing cameras held back by security, mouths moving with questions that would never be answered. Inside the vehicle, the air felt different, quieter, not the quiet of fear, but the quiet that comes after a storm finally breaks. Admiral Eleanor Graves sat across from her, posture relaxed now, the weight of command momentarily set aside. For the first time since the doors had closed behind them, she studied Rebecca not as an officer on trial, but as a woman who had endured something most never would. "That salute," the Admiral said at last, voice low, "was a long time coming." Rebecca didn't answer right away. Her hands rested on her knees, steady now that the cuffs were gone, though faint impressions still lingered on her skin. "I wasn't sure it ever would," she replied. The Admiral nodded, looking out the window. Most people never understand what silence costs. They think it's easy to say nothing, to endure. She turned back. It isn't. Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she saw the faces again. A narrow room lit by a single bulb. Children pulled from shadows. The sound of her own breathing through a scope as she covered an extraction that should never have gone wrong. Teammates who didn't make it back, and families who would never know the full truth of how brave their sons had been. I didn't stay silent because I'm strong, Rebecca said quietly. I stayed silent because breaking would have made it all meaningless. The Admiral didn't interrupt. When they called me a liar, Rebecca continued, when they said I imagined it all, there were moments I almost wanted to scream. Not for me, for them, for the ones who died believing their mission mattered. Her voice didn't crack, but it softened, like embers settling. If I had spoken, she said, I might have saved myself, but I would have burned everything else. The car slowed as they passed through a secured gate. Beyond it, a helicopter waited, rotors idle, crew standing at attention. Admiral Graves leaned back slightly. You changed something in that room today, she said, not just the outcome, the way people see service. Rebecca looked at her, surprised. They expected tears, the Admiral continued. They expected anger, confession, defiance. A small smile touched her lips. What they saw instead was restraint, and that unsettles people more than rage ever could. Rebecca thought of Henry Walsh, still inside the courthouse, piecing together the truth he'd nearly missed. She thought of the young officers watching from the gallery, some with doubt in their eyes, others with something closer to awe. I didn't want to be an example, Rebecca said. I know, the Admiral replied. That's why you are one. The helicopter blades began to spin, wind rippling across the tarmac. As they stepped out of the car, Rebecca paused, the noise pressing in around them. Admiral, she said, why wait? Graves turned to her. You mean, why let it go as far as it did? Rebecca nodded. The Admiral's expression hardened not with anger, but with honesty. Because we needed to see who would lie, she said, who would fabricate records, who would stand in a courtroom and swear to things they never did just to protect themselves. Rebecca exhaled slowly. And now, Graves said, raising her voice over the growing roar, they will answer for it. As they boarded the helicopter, Rebecca glanced back one last time toward the courthouse. It looked smaller from here, less permanent, like something that had already begun to fade. The flight north was quiet. Rebecca stared out over the water, watching sunlight fracture across the waves. For weeks, she'd lived under the weight of one question. Was it worth it? Sitting there now, she finally had her answer. Not because she'd been cleared, not because an admiral had walked into a room and shut it down, but because she had walked through fire without betraying the people who couldn't speak anymore. That night, in a secure office far from cameras and courtrooms, Rebecca sat alone for the first time in months. No guards, no cuffs. Just a cup of black coffee cooling beside her and a sealed folder on the desk marked classified. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she allowed herself something she hadn't in a long time. She breathed. And in that stillness, Rebecca Stone understood something most never do. Honor isn't loud. Truth doesn't always defend itself. And sometimes, the greatest victory is surviving with your soul intact. Opportunity rarely arrives with applause. Most of the time, it comes the way this one did, unannounced, understated, wrapped in silence so thick you almost miss it. Rebecca Stone learned that lesson the morning after. She stood alone in a secure briefing room deep inside the Pentagon, the kind of place without windows or clocks. The walls were bare. The air faintly smelled of coffee and old paper. On the table in front of her lay the sealed folder she'd noticed the night before, its edges worn, its label deliberately vague. She hadn't opened it yet, not because she was afraid, but because once she did, there would be no going back. The door opened softly behind her. Admiral Eleanor Graves entered. No entourage this time, no ceremony. Just a woman who had carried the weight of command long enough to know when silence mattered more than rank. You look like someone standing on the edge of a long swim, the Admiral said gently. Rebecca allowed a faint smile, just deciding how cold the water is. Graves took a seat across from her. You won't find warmth in that folder, she said, but you will find purpose. Rebecca finally broke the seal. Inside were maps, names, financial trails crossing continents, private military contractors operating in the shadows between governments and wars, selling intelligence, destabilizing regions, profiting from chaos. And at the center of it all, a familiar thread. The people who tried to destroy me, Rebecca said quietly. Yes, Graves replied, and the people they were protecting. Rebecca exhaled. She'd suspected as much. During the operation that had cost her so dearly, she'd uncovered fragments encrypted communications, unusual movements, extraction routes that had been compromised before boots ever hit the ground. She'd reported it, and someone had buried it. We're forming a joint task force, Graves continued, small, compartmentalized, drawn from multiple special operations and intelligence communities. No paper trail unless absolutely necessary. Rebecca closed the folder slowly. You want me to lead it? It wasn't a question. Graves met her eyes. We want someone who understands the cost of silence and the price of betrayal. Rebecca leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath her. For the first time since the trial ended, the exhaustion caught up to her, not physical, but emotional. The kind that comes after surviving something you never thought you would. I just got my name back, she said, my rank, my life. And now you're being asked to risk them again. Graves said, I won't pretend otherwise. Rebecca stared at the tabletop. She thought of the courtroom, of the laughter, the whispers, the certainty with which strangers had decided who she was. She thought of the children pulled from darkness, of teammates who never came home, of families who would finally be told their sons hadn't died for nothing. Then she looked up. When do we start? The Admiral smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just enough to show respect. Immediately. The days that followed moved quickly, too quickly for reflection. Rebecca met the team in stages, no handshakes, no speeches, just nods of recognition between people who understood the work without needing it explained. There was Caleb Monroe, former Air Force Special Reconnaissance, quiet, surgical, eyes that missed nothing. Lena Torres, CIA analyst who spoke 5 languages and trusted no one fully, including herself. Mark Ellison, Navy cryptologic warfare, whose humor barely masked the weight he carried. They didn't ask about the trial. They didn't need to. In the early hours of one morning, as Rebecca stood before a digital map, glowing blue in the dim light, she realized something had changed, not just around her, but inside her. For weeks, she'd been defined by defense. Now, she was being trusted with offense. That afternoon, she made a call she'd been putting off. Henry Walsh answered on the second ring. Tell me you're calling to say this nightmare is officially over. Rebecca smiled softly. Not over, just redirected. He sighed. I had a feeling. They're offering you a position, she said. Advisory role. Classification oversight. You earned it. A pause, and you. I'm going back into the shadows, she replied. Henry didn't try to talk her out of it. Then I'll say what I should have said sooner, he said quietly. I'm honored to have stood next to you. That night, Rebecca stood alone on the roof of the building, looking out over Washington's lights. Somewhere below, people were living ordinary lives, arguing, laughing, sleeping unaware of how close the world often came to unraveling. She touched the faint marks on her wrists. They were fading now, but she doubted they'd ever truly disappear. And she didn't want them to. They were proof. Proof that even when everything is taken, your name, your reputation, your voice, what remains still matters. Rebecca Stone turned away from the view and headed back inside. There was work to be done. Growth doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly between sleepless nights and decisions made without applause. Rebecca Stone learned that, in the weeks that followed, as the task force slipped into motion like a blade drawn from its sheath. They operated without names, without insignia, without acknowledgement. And that was exactly how Rebecca wanted it. The first phase was surveillance financial trails, shell companies, encrypted communications hopping borders faster than diplomats ever could. Rebecca spent hours standing behind her team, listening more than she spoke, letting patterns emerge instead of forcing conclusions. That was her first change. Before the trial, she'd been sharp, decisive sometimes, too much so. Now, she waited, she absorbed, she trusted silence again. But this time, by choice, not by force. Then came the anomaly. It was Lena Torres who found it at 2:14 Mum, her voice low but urgent as she called Rebecca into the ops room. "This transfer," Lena said, pointing at the screen. "It shouldn't exist." The funds had moved through 6 countries, bounced between offshore accounts, and resurfaced in a way that made no sense unless someone on the inside had wanted it to be found. Rebecca stared at the numbers. "It's bait," she said. "Or a confession," Mark Ellison replied from the corner. Rebecca felt the old instinct flare the one that had once sent her running toward danger instead of away from it, but she reined it in. "Who does it lead to?" she asked. Lena hesitated. That's the problem. The name on the final ledger wasn't foreign. It wasn't anonymous. It was Captain Marcus Holloway. Rebecca didn't move. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, not with shock, but with recognition. The pieces slid into place with terrifying clarity. "He wasn't just lying," Caleb Monroe said quietly. "He was cleaning up." Rebecca nodded. Holloway hadn't tried to destroy her out of spite. He'd done it because she'd gotten too close. The trial wasn't revenge, it was containment. And it almost worked. "Where is he now?" Rebecca asked. Officially, Lena said, on medical leave. Unofficially, he disappeared 48 hours ago. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The second change. Before, she might have blamed herself, questioned every decision that led here. Now, she saw the truth with brutal clarity. This wasn't about her worth. It never had been. It was about power. They tracked Holloway to a private airstrip in Eastern Europe, an unscheduled flight, unmarked cargo, and a security detail that screamed contractor, not military. He was moving fast, and someone was helping him. The task force mobilized within hours. As the transport plane cut through the night, Rebecca sat strapped in, helmet resting against her knee, feeling the familiar hum beneath her boots. It had been months since she'd been in the field. Her body remembered before her mind did. Caleb leaned over. "You okay, Commander?" Rebecca met his eyes. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." But deep down, she knew this mission was different. This wasn't about hostages or objectives on a map. This was about confronting the ghost that had almost erased her. They touched down outside the perimeter just before dawn. Cold air, pale light, the kind of morning that feels unfinished. As they advanced, Rebecca spotted something that made her stomach tighten, a familiar formation pattern. Textbook Navy, used by someone who knew how SEALs moved. "He trained them," she murmured. The breach was fast, controlled, silent. Inside the hangar, chaos waited. Gunfire cracked through metal and concrete. Shouts echoed. The smell of oil and cordite filled the air. Rebecca moved with calm precision, every step deliberate, not rushing, not hesitating. She wasn't proving anything anymore. She was executing. They found Holloway in a secured office at the far end of the hangar, panic written across his face when the door blew inward. He reached for a weapon that wasn't there. "Rebecca," he breathed, disbelief edging into fear. "You shouldn't be here." She lowered her rifle, just slightly. "No," she said evenly. "You shouldn't." He laughed sharp, brittle. "Do you know how close you came to ruining everything I did what I had to do?" Rebecca's eyes didn't leave him. "You destroyed records. You lied under oath. You tried to bury the truth." "I protected the system," he snapped. "You were collateral." That was the moment. The third change. Rebecca realized she didn't hate him. Not anymore. She felt something colder. "You don't protect a system by feeding it lies," she said. "You rot it from the inside." Security moved in, cuffs snapping shut around Holloway's wrists, the same sound that had haunted her weeks before. As he was led away, he looked back at her. "They'll never know what you really did," he said bitterly. Rebecca watched him disappear into custody. "I know," she replied softly, "and that's enough." As the sun finally crested the horizon, light spilling into the hangar, Rebecca stood still for a moment, breathing in, breathing out. She hadn't just survived. She'd changed. Stronger, not because she'd hardened, but because she'd learned when to let go. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty settled in. This story wasn't over yet. There's a kind of silence that only comes after everything has been taken from you and given back differently. Rebecca Stone felt it weeks later, standing alone at the edge of a training field just after dawn. The air was cool, the sky still undecided between night and morning. In the distance, young operators ran drills, boots hitting sand, voices strained but determined, life continuing, always continuing. She wasn't there for recognition. She never was. Her uniform had changed again, new insignia, new authority, but the scar along her wrist, the faint echo of cuffs remained. She didn't hide it. She didn't need to. It had become part of her story, whether the world ever heard it or not. The official narrative came out in fragments, carefully shaped for public consumption, charges dismissed, evidence compromised, a quiet reassignment. The truth, the real truth, remained sealed, buried beneath layers of classification and necessity. And Rebecca was okay with that. Because what she'd learned, what the trial had burned into her bones, was this: being seen is not the same as being known, and being honored is not the same as being true. She thought of the courtroom again, the whispers, the laughter, the certainty with which strangers had decided her fate, how easily they had believed the worst, how quickly they had turned silence into guilt. If she was honest with herself, that hurt more than the chains ever did. But pain has a strange way of sharpening perspective. One afternoon, as she prepared to leave the base, a young woman approached her hesitantly, fresh uniform, nervous eyes, determination barely held together. "Commander Stone," she asked. Rebecca turned, at ease. The young officer swallowed. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" Rebecca asked gently. "For not quitting," the woman replied, when everyone was watching. Rebecca studied her for a long moment. "Most of the time," she said quietly, "no one is watching." The young woman nodded, understanding more than she realized. That night, Rebecca sat alone with a cup of black coffee, the way she often did now. The world outside her window was calm, almost deceptively so. She thought of Holloway in custody, of the system slowly correcting itself, of the damage that would never fully be undone. And she thought of the people who would never know her name. The ones she'd covered with a steady scope while they ran for their lives. The ones who trusted her voice in their ear when everything else was chaos. The ones who never made it back but went believing the mission mattered. That was the legacy that counted. Not medals, not headlines, not even vindication. Just the quiet knowledge that, when it mattered most, she had not broken. Rebecca Stone had stood in a room where her entire life was dismantled piece by piece. She had been called a liar, a fraud, a mistake, and still she had chosen restraint over rage, duty over defense, honor over survival. That choice changed her, not into something harder, but into something deeper. Because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand belief. It doesn't need applause. It endures. Somewhere out there, another courtroom would one day fill with whispers. Another soldier would be judged before they were understood. Another truth would wait patiently in the dark. And when that moment came, whether anyone ever knew it or not, Rebecca believed this. Silence, when chosen for the right reasons, can be the loudest testimony of all. She finished her coffee, stood, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring another briefing, another mission, another quiet decision made without recognition. And she would meet it the same way she always had, with steady hands, a clear conscience, and a heart that never forgot why she served. Rebecca was willing to lose her name, her rank, her freedom, even the way people saw her, because she believed some promises were heavier than personal survival. She showed us that integrity isn't proven when the truth is convenient. But when it is dangerous, most people think courage looks like speaking up. Sometimes it does. But sometimes, courage looks like staying silent, not because you're afraid, but because you refuse to betray something bigger than yourself. Rebecca didn't win because an admiral walked into a courtroom. She won long before that, when she chose not to break, even while being misunderstood. And that's why this story stays with you. Because deep down, we all wonder, would I still do the right thing if no one believed me? If Rebecca Stone's story meant something to you, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.